When you see a good movie, it makes you want to make it.
U.S. Satellite Broadcasting presents a very special television event.
You said you have to want to make films, he said, so badly that you could kill.
USSB brings you a conversation with Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola.
You want to make films, you want to show films, and suddenly you see this thing, you say, hey, yeah, I forgot that could be fun.
I tried to get Marty the job to do the second Godfather.
Yeah, I know.
Because I never want to have anything to do with gangsters again.
Recently, these two film legends met with USSB host Jeffrey Gilmore, director of the Sundance Film Festival, to explore their thoughts on filmmaking, Hollywood, and their own amazing careers. U.S. Satellite Broadcasting is proud to present Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola.
Both of you have had extremely diverse careers, actually, in terms of the range of films that you've been working with. You've worked with films that are the epics of their time, and you've made very small and intimate films, and you have as well. And do you describe that diversity in your own careers as reflecting the changes in the industry, or is it something that you yourself pursued? Marty?
I think it came out of the change in the industry in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and I know Francis started earlier, even the 60s, and somehow in the 70s, that decade, we were able to make pictures. People weren't talking about how much a picture was making. I mean, at a certain point, yes, how much money it would make or how much they would be able to risk. But primarily, they were talking about the new Terry Malick picture, or the new Paul Schrader picture, or that sort of new Francis Coppola film. These were films that were like, they were proud to make, in a way. They were proud to underwrite, I think, filmmakers with, and I don't want to use it because it could become a dirty word, but vision. A vision, meaning that they have a way of telling a story, give them as much control. And that built up to, of course, United Artists, which was an extraordinary place, making Heaven's Gate. Now, I made a picture there, Raging Bull, at the same time. In fact, Raging Bull opened 10 days before Heaven's Gate. And when that folded, we folded too with it. The picture was hardly re-released. The establishment of the UA executives left. It was a complete mess. And everything was really over at that point. But it wasn't easy to get the films made in the 70s, but there was an atmosphere of making special movies, right. A Robert Altman picture. There was a body of work. But when we hit the 80s, I know Altman, after we suffered at 20th Century Fox at that time. I had King of Comedy there, right. And Altman had a film called Health, I think, and they didn't even release it. And after that, I think Bob Altman, for almost 10 years, made smaller pictures, fringe things, until he did The Player in 1990. So they effectively altered that career. And for me, the 80s were like a diaspora. I had to search around. I had to learn how to make films again. So I started making low-budget films, a film called After Hours in 1984, where I learned how to shoot a picture again in 40 days. But you see, the problem with that is that it's at the age of 30, shoot 20 days, yeah. At the age of 40, 40 days, you're pushing it even. Like sometimes, I don't know if I have the energy, you see. And so that's why I had to start all over again. And then finally just fight our way back to a situation where we can get a picture like Goodfellas made. But even that, it only got made when we finally cast Robert De Niro in the smaller part there, the cameo part of Jimmy. Mm-hmm. That's the only way it got made. Mm-hmm. And so, in a way, I've been living, each picture I've been able to make, has been luck, and in some cases assignments, like Cape Fear, or even Casino was an assignment. Mm-hmm. And a picture like Age of Innocence, pure luck, that Mark Canton believed in making the picture. I've been very lucky the past 25 years because a lot of studio executives, there's always been one studio where somebody wanted to make a picture that I was directing. And I always kind of come in under the wire, in a way, and sort of make the picture before they will realize what's happened and get out, in a way. And then it's a problem of selling them to a certain extent because they're usually a little bit off the beaten track kind of film.
And Francis, you've had to operate the same way, haven't you? I mean,
yeah, it's sort of really moving to hear a guy like Marty, who made Raging Bull, to talk about how basically he's trying to squeak by with it.
Exactly.
I mean,
it's amazing.
It's heartbreaking to think that. From my experience, I saw at the end of the 60s, I mean, I actually worked for Jack Warner, and I actually knew Sam Goldwyn, and I think the climate at the end of the old that traditional studio period was coming to an end, and it was a little bit of a no man's land, Wild West. And
Yes.
the movies that I got to make in the 70s, and I'm pretty much known for 5 years where I made The Godfather and Conversation and Godfather 2 and Apocalypse. And that was purely that we were just running too fast for anyone to stop us.
Yeah.
We never got permission to start on those movies. We just sort of started, and by the time they realized what we were doing, we already had those films in production. And in the case of Apocalypse, we really had to almost finance it. So it wasn't so much that it was a great time, but it was they hadn't yet gotten their middle management in place. They control movie making. It's very hard to run away from them now because they have such a big army of people watching you. For me, I always dreamed of being a writer-director, and my first pictures, when I first met Marty, I was this guy who wanted to write original screenplays and make movies, and The Godfather sort of the surprising success of that changed my career and enabled me to have a company and stuff, which then later I was trying to make movies to support. So the diversity of my films comes from the fact that I always would say, well, if it's an assignment, as The Godfather was, well, I'll learn a lot from doing this, and I used to use every film as a kind of experiment and saying, someday when I get back to doing my own personal films, hopefully from personal screenplay, I'll then have done all these experiments and I'll be able to utilize what I've learned. So I very much agree with Marty that we used the profession of making movies and as a kind of way to educate ourselves and learn, because the cinema movie making, I mean, they haven't uncovered 6% of what it can be and what can do.
Exactly.
And they discovered 4.5% in the silent era.
Exactly.
A number of people have argued that the industry is once again at the stage of a really fundamental change. The same way at the end of the silent era, the end of post-war period, and in some ways at the time that you both really emerged as filmmakers in the end of the 60s and the 70s. Do you agree with that?
Well, I do.
Yeah. I agree also.
I think, it's been now 15 years or so since Heaven's Gate, which is the film that I date, that basically they weren't going to put up with, these directors.
They're not going to put up with us anymore.
Yeah, it was a coup d'etat.
Complete coup d'etat. The 70s, the decade of director, or sort of director as author, quote unquote. What's the word? Acknowledged author. In a way.
And also they considered a kind of runaway that now the corporations were seeing, the entertainment business is a big, big worldwide business, and we can't tolerate a director or that type of mentality running away. Budgets are wildly out of control. These guys are making too much money. And they really clamped on their they built up their middle managements, and they got a kind of culture police to be sure that no one could run away and start a production without, quote, a green light, which was not a phrase I had ever heard before.
No. I'm still waiting for mine this year.
Well, that's the trouble. But then when you think about what happened, all these 15 years later, budgets went far more wild out of control than ever before. Basically, whereas they sort of put the director in the place, but then the salaries of executives went kind of into, no director ever made $80 million a year, as some of these fellas do.
No.
And they basically didn't make a classic since that time, with the exception of a few films that, again, the directors either had the clout or did. So, I mean, I think now, to support what you're saying, is the business is not doing well. Those studio-developed pictures are uniformly failures. Once in a while, if a film does well, it's because a principal artist stuck his neck out and fought, either had the power or had the perseverance. And, I think they're very quickly revising what to do because the business is not profitable in the way that they require it to be.
So where's it going? What's happening that represents that kind of change? Is it a change that's about globalization or about technology, or is it? Well,
you're talking about corporations. You're talking about corporations that are so big and so it's phenomenal. It's almost the amount of money to be made is so huge that when there's more money to be made, less risk has to be taken.
Well, they need
And that's
to
the
have
problem.
they need to have results for their shareholders for every quarter. They can't.
Yeah.
They can't. Movie business is not Coca-Cola. It does not exist on a standard product that you just widen. You still depend on artistry, and this flies in the face of the way modern corporations are run. What I think is going to happen is that whenever you have a old system that basically is not profitable and shaky, at the same time you have a vital new group of young people who are very passionate about
Right,
movies.
exactly.
So you have something very vital and strong and something old and decaying. It's sort of like when neorealism collapsed the old Italian costume
Right.
picture. I think it's going to happen. I used to say in 4 years. Now I say 18 months.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's the real hope. The real hope, I think, is the fact that film means telling a story in film means so much to so many young people in this particular country, and other countries too, as well. But so much to young people. They want to use this medium as a way of telling a story, and they will do anything to get it on film. I mean, if a film costs like Swoon, cost $10,000 in black and white 16 millimeter, they'll get it done. If there's a way to get it done, they will do it, and that's where the lifeblood is coming from, and that's where the vitality is coming from. I think, the independent movement. You see, the problem is to a certain extent. The problem, and also one of the good things about it is that Hollywood recognizes the independent movement, and what happens is that they pick up one or two kids and put them into a Hollywood situation, but very often they bring them along too fast, like a fighter. They get them to fight the champ too. They give them $40 million, $60 million. No, give them 10, give them 20. Let them build up to it, and then they're out.
Well, now they're revising that also, and they're starting to rather, kind of do what Disney did with Miramax, and all of a sudden all of the majors are starting these new little independent companies, again, hoping. I mean, I personally think that the management of the traditional studios are desperate because they know they're unnecessary, they know they're overpaid, and they know the truth that the films really cost more than they're publicly admitting, and they're doing less. So it's going to change.
You've always been fascinated by technology. In fact, well in front of the so-called technological revolution, which has been taking place in this last decade.
Yeah, but not anymore.
Has it taken the direction? Has it taken the direction that you want to go?
Well, my feeling was, back then, and then whenever it was 25 years ago, I saw, being an ex-boy scientist, I realized what electronics and digital technology was going to do to movies, and at first I was excited because I thought that would enable us to approach movies that we wouldn't ordinarily been able to do, because we'd be able to have scenery that was not totally have to build, and so I saw it as going to be a big boon to filmmaking. I didn't realize that it would be yet another kind of shackle on the cinema.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it really is. I only became involved with computer rendering, so to speak, or computer-generated images, and particularly my last film.
On this film, which was a great service to you.
Yeah, it really was. But it's another way of working, and I think you pointed out it's become a painterly medium, rather than mise en scène, which means you take things, you put them in place according to the frame. This is in the foreground, that's in the background. This, of course, is here. This moves here. The camera moves this way. That's mise en scène. But now, with the computer, you can do anything.
Right.
So it becomes more, as you pointed out, you had said it was a painterly thing. You could paint what kind of sky you want. The reality is I grew up downtown. I didn't see the sky. I never saw it. We saw, you know what I'm saying? It isn't like you grow up in Arizona. I always talk about Spielberg growing up in Phoenix, Arizona. He could tell the sun's coming up, and we never saw that. So I know a light bulb, basically. That was for me.
You
so
knew
now
about the cannoli.
I know about the
Sfogliatelle.
the Sfogliatelle. In Ferraris or in Cafe Roma, you go in, you know that it's either a fresh batch, or it isn't. They're making a new one, so you wait. But the reality was, like, suddenly I'm looking there and they say, what kind of sky do you want? Well, I guess, a dramatic sky? Okay. What does that look like? Well, a little steel gray, maybe it's too much. That kind of thing. And suddenly you're putting in images. It's almost like a painting.
Yeah, I thought that would help a guy, say, we all knew about Stanley Kubrick wanted to do the life of Napoleon.
Right. Yeah.
Well, what a subject matter. And
fantastic.
we figured, and seeing what he did with Spartacus, where he had, the soldiers marching, and then we realized with those double exposures, we said, well, that will mean that Stanley Kubrick can make the life of Napoleon, because suddenly he doesn't have to build everything, doesn't have to have 10 million extras. But it didn't quite go that way, and more I feel, at least the director, or my generation director, started to lose control of the means of production, and then before you knew it, they started to operate on this kind of glut of films where every week there are so many movies to come out, and they're rated like a horse race on Monday, and so that, combined with the middle management controlling everything, less and less, I mean, I felt personally more and more squeezed out, and I had to either say, well, let me figure out how to make a movie that makes a lot of money, so they'll reward me after that to let me make, which was always the quid
You got
pro quo.
Dracula. No,
Well,
did great.
exactly.
You know, you're always trying to, like, somehow stay, to be viable to them, because Wells basically, you know, kind of became Hollywood's enemy, and they threw him away. And for 15 years of his life, he wanted to make films, but nobody would make it possible for him.
Do you think audiences, I mean, obviously the corporate problem in Hollywood is again, as you stated, like a real shackle, a real problem. Are audiences and critics less sophisticated now than they were? Are they less open to things than they were?
I think so.
Well, audiences have now been brainwashed by 40 years of television.
Yeah. See, it's a different frame of reference. We had the frame of reference from Hollywood's golden age. We saw movies in big screens in theaters, and we talk about, okay, let's talk about Casablanca, for example, which is a wonderful film and a great example of film coming out of the golden age of the Hollywood studios. But, you know, I think, unfortunately, a lot of the audiences now, the younger kids, the younger people even, their frame of reference is television.
The 30-minute sitcom or the 30-minute dramatic
with snappy
show.
dialogue, you know, which in itself is quite funny. I know, like The Odd Couple, for example. It's one thing as a play, it's another thing as a film, but as a sitcom, it developed the characters of Felix and Oscar, and it was kind of interesting and all that sort of thing. But there are other ways to go, you know, and it's really difficult because at this point, it led a lot of studio executives to believe all you need is basically a good script. What they mean by good script is good beginning, middle, and end, with a lot of the script is very easy to read.
They all went to that weekend seminar where they learned that principle of dramaturgy.
And you get good actors who are bankable, and a good cameraman who can basically place the people within the frame properly. A director you don't really need. You do what you want, you know, and you make a good film. You make a good film, but those films, in my estimation, reflect television. And even if it reflects the best of television, it still doesn't wash for me, because this is cinema. This is something else. It's something else that has to be here in this room.
Also, for me, when I'm in a restaurant and I hear a young couple talking about a movie that they've just seen, you could really hear how important it is for them to get something out of this film that helps them, you know, illuminate their own life. Because, I mean, their relationship, I love you, I don't love you. And you can see how that audience looks to film to somehow, you know, illuminate life. And as long as a film is going to be this product that is based, that you make a film because it's like a film that was made, that was successful, then how are writers and directors and actors going to deal with the subject matter that helps interpret modern life? I mean, how, the life is changing. The role of the woman has changed so much in terms of how she has gone out in the workforce and this and the politics, all these things. You wish that films could shed some light on this stuff, because that seems to be the role of art, certainly.
Yeah, because it reflects you, reflects your society.
And you even have an audience now which is insulated from foreign language work, which is, again, something that 25 years ago we saw a great deal of, and we don't see it all.
This is the problem. Somebody, 20 years ago, I think I know who it is, or what company it was, convinced the American public that they don't want to read, they don't like to read subtitles. They convinced them, and they crazy enough to believe it. And it's in TV Guide, shown with subtitles, so be warned that you may have to read. Who cares?
So you lose that, all that fresh view of sex.
New blood coming in.
Stuff that used to come from Japanese movies, or, you know, French movies.
Italian films and everything.
I think also that what you said, the demise of United Artists, because United Artists was not just a movie company. It was United Artists. And it was also the wonderful luck of it having Mr. Krim and that team.
Pleskow, and they were great.
They were a real team, and they had a philosophy. They didn't look at your rushes. They heard they saw your script. They got you to kneel and say you wouldn't go over budget, and then you were free to make the movie. And when that film was destroyed, that film company was destroyed. That's a big loss.
You got to know that United Artists also started. Okay, it started in the late 30s, and through the 40s, it released a lot of British films. But in the 50s. It was like a whole other voice coming out of Hollywood. They did films, granted, many of them black and white and that sort of thing, but they were smaller budgeted pictures. But they dealt with they tackled subject matter that was very strong. One of the greatest films ever made to come out of Hollywood was made by UA at the time, A Sweet Smell of Success. Right. You know, pictures that were very tough. You always knew when a UA film came out. It usually said Hecht, Hill, and Lancaster. Burt Lancaster producing it with Ben Hecht and James Hill, I think, and it's some fantastic films. The Big Knife.
We really
and,
miss. I mean, my generation. I think it's certainly true for Marty. Is that if I had to work for a company, I wanted to work for United Artists.
Yeah.
And I still do.
Yeah.
If there could be such, it wasn't Miramax. Miramax is not United Artists.
Are any of the specialized divisions similar to that, or is it even possible?
Miramax has a wonderful marketing
They-
ability. They
they're
really
brilliant.
fight for their
Yeah.
movies,
Yeah.
and so that's wonderful. But no, United Artists is very lacking today. That it performed a certain function that no other company is doing.
And Orion really wasn't a successor to it in the same vision.
But if you look at what Orion did in those few
bad.
years, I mean,
Not
they had
bad.
a wonderful
Not
track record.
bad,
You
yeah.
know, they didn't manage it financially
but
enough to sustain it.
Definitely a good track record. That's for sure.
But I think there's much to learn from the old United Artists that, oddly enough, is even more pertinent now in the 90s, and for this passionate new generation, because that's the real hope, is the fact that these kids, whom they previously called Generation X, if they want to be a chef, they want to be like a chef because they love to be a chef, and they'll go work 16 hours a day in some restaurant for nothing, and they feel the same way about movies, and that is, to me, you know, where the life is going to come from.
But is that vitality that's coming out of the independent sector, is that something that's actually going to keep the new generation of what's coming out of Hollywood, or some people feel as though Hollywood's just going to beat back or compromise or absorb
Compromise
that
them,
vitality?
you
Well,
mean?
Compromise
they
that
try to
independent.
co-opt them.
In the same way that
Hey,
you
why
have
not?
to
The guy is
exist in the same
talented,
ways.
the man or the woman is talented. You bring him in, let's see if he can make a film for us. And sometimes that works. You never know.
The vitality of the industry, maybe right now, as we've said, is maybe coming out of the independents. There's this gulf now between the studios, where you have a film made for several $100 million, whose absolute incredible success is going to spur on perhaps more evolution in that direction of making certain kinds of films, or would you disagree with that? Is this success of Titanic surprise you?
I disagree. I think that the Titanic, first of all, its cost is even beyond what you
they
think.
say, yeah.
So that, I mean, I think it's great. I love it when a filmmaker is getting trashed and they're getting ready to fire all the executives,
And then
and the film shows them that in the end, it's the movie. It's not the star. It's not who is getting the $20 million. It's the movie. And that's the lesson of Titanic, not that you should make a $250 million movie. So I think that's what's going to come down to, is that it's going to come down to, just as they say in real estate, location. It's going to be, it's the movie. And you come up with a movie that has life and it's about something interesting and is done well, that's the best policy.
Yeah. Whether it costs $60,000 or $100 million.
Personally, I would be interested in the area of movie making, from $12 million down, and not care who I wouldn't pay an actor $20 million to be in a movie. I mean, so many of them. We have a whole list of them this year that had two of those guys. So that's not the answer.
Right? Yeah.
They're not stupid people, right? So they know that. So now it's something exciting that's in the movie, whether it has a newcomer. A newcomer is even good because now the big stars are so overexposed and they're on the rental movies.
And sometimes they come out 3 films a year. They make.
Yeah, they are.
And how do you like the posters now too?
Yeah, well,
the posters,
and the trailers.
Now, the posters now. I'm a old poster collector.
I can see them always.
I mean, now the final irony. Every poster looks exactly the same. Even the actors' faces look the same. You have to have just the title of the film. You can't read who directed, who wrote it. It's all a block, so nobody gets any more credit than the other person.
Well, you've both been responsible for the discovery of like major acting talent for 25 years. I mean, if you look at some of the major talent, I mean, you go back to the films that they started in, they were both your works. I mean, De Niro and Foster, Cruise, I mean,
and De Palma too. Brian
Matt
De Palma.
Dillon, I mean, a lot of
people.
De
Palma
had
something. De Niro first.
Is casting no longer really? Is casting that important now to what you do as a filmmaker? Or are a lot of roles and actors almost interchangeable? Because one of the arguments people make is that it didn't matter what part Kate Winslet played in Titanic. It could have been 6 other people. Does it really matter?
I don't think so. I think it matters. I think that's one of the joys of movies, that some actor comes and brings it to life. And a role can be very good, as evidence, for example, Nicolas Cage has been in movies for 15 years. Finally, he got a part that was able to connect. So it's, to me, it's acting and writing.
And Nick Cage, I mean, was one of these actors who was very brave, trying all different, go off
Daredevil.
on the edge. Daredevil, Wild at Heart, dancing on the table, doing Elvis. I mean, it's amazing. And then finally leaving Las Vegas, was able to able to pull it together.
Casting and acting is at the very. I view it as writing and acting as the oxygen and hydrogen that makes the makes the movie.
And still very crucial for for the work that you do as well. I mean, when you're casting a film like Kundun, I mean, you're dealing with a lot of unknown cast as well as not just star cast.
Well, that's a special situation. I mean, there was no way you can make a film about Tibet and use actors. There's no way. Not even you can use, in some cases you can say, well, you can use some Chinese actors. It's not the case. The best thing to do, you'd find somebody. There had to be some people in India. They found them who were able. The Pasolini thing. It's Robert Flaherty. It's Elephant Boy.
That's casting.
That's
too.
casting.
That's acting.
It very much is.
Everybody's an actor. You're acting now. It's all, we're all acting. So it's everybody's an actor. You see, and if you just get a person who can pretty much be themselves in front of when a camera's running, you're okay.
Do you have special actors that you favor now more above others, or is it according to the work?
Well, you come to know, as with all collaborators, be it a photographer or art director, you come and know people, become your friends, and you like very much working with them, and you enjoy it. And so, of course, there are actors that you would like to work with over and over again.
For instance, I mean, it's someone.
Obviously, Bobby De Niro.
Obviously,
I like working with Bob.
He's such a creative person.
Yeah, I had a very long collaboration with him. But you see, that's also some of the reasons why those pictures got made in the 70s. Taxi Driver. The night he won the Academy Award, we were there. Remember, you picked it up for him, and you came back and hit me on the shoulder and said, "This is good for your picture," because Bob was in it.
Right.
And because that particular script, I mean, was a daring script at the time. To us, we were crazy. We thought, hey, this is fine, let's do it, But apparently it was disturbed a lot of people, didn't want to make it. But Michael and Julia Phillips, putting myself together with De Niro, and that night of him winning for Godfather 2, helped the picture get made. And then the same thing with New York, and certainly, which was a project of De Niro's, which was Raging Bull. Right. So because of the actors, an actor like him who was a very brave actor, who didn't really care about, looking pretty in a movie and that sort of thing, and taking lots of chances, I was able to work. Luckily, we found a common ground to work on these projects together, where I felt I was doing something of my own, he felt he was doing something of his own, and we were able to make those pictures. But after that, I didn't work from after King of Comedy was 1981.
Right.
And next time I worked with him, he did the cameo role in Goodfellas 9 years later.
Right.
So it's, but certainly when we got back together, we were in our trailer. I was in his trailer, because we're selecting the ties and the shirts and the cufflinks, which we enjoy a lot. Oh, the socks don't match. No.
Which one you like? This one or that one? I like this one. But what about that one? Okay, I like that one.
No,
but what about the first one? You said you liked the first one.
So we looked, and we're fooling around. And he looked at me at one point, and he said, "Gee, why don't we talk about so much when we're doing King of Comedy?" We sort of got older, and we talked it all out. We'd explored each other's ideas, and we found it so comfortable that we made another couple of pictures together in the 90s then. As Joe Pesci I like working with for his sense of humor, and he's a wonderful person to have around on the set. But, it's hard when you work with a new person. It's very hard. You have to all sing.
And sometimes it doesn't click in the same way.
It doesn't click. Even if you sit there singing, Getting to Know You from Rodgers and Hammerstein, it doesn't work.
Do you have the same relationship with anybody that you feel special about at this point?
Well, there are a lot of actors that have appeared in either bigger or smaller parts in my films, and yes, I very much, it's like being with an old friend, and you know that the conversation's going to be good.
Right.
And, just recently I got to work with Mickey Rourke after he sort of had gone into self-imposed whatever. Yeah. And, I always thought Mickey Rourke was just a very sweet person, despite all his front, know. Yeah. And he is, and so that's more what I focused on, just that he doesn't put me off with his pugilistic, posings. And it's always wonderful to... I've like Marty been with certain actors 3, 4, 5 times in movies, and no actor has ever said to me what I really want to hear from him is, Francis, no matter what, any movie you want to make, I'm there, it's free, don't worry about it.
No, I know.
I'm waiting for
I know. And they always say, oh, Marty, you can get any actor to be in your films. No, I can't.
The same thing.
Oh, what are you kidding?
They're too busy working for Woody and Bob Altman.
Yeah, exactly. And usually they come to me that the money isn't enough, and not that it's a bad thing, to a certain extent. It depends. If the money is a certain amount of money and the guy has to be there 10 weeks, that's a problem. If for the same amount of money, you could be there 3 weeks, that's different. If you can get all the scenes together. But then it's a whole problem shooting out to continuity. We don't have the location, and we have this.
Packaging,
it's a nightmare.
With deals being made in studios with agencies where you're packaging films and you're packaging that talent into films, and with filmmakers, you change the nature of what their availabilities are, what they're working on.
I still rely on, even more than friendship and all relationships is that if you come up with the great part, even a
Yeah,
little part where
absolutely.
they can score.
Absolutely.
When you ask an actor to be in your movie and say it's just like a 2-week thing, if they can score in that role, they have a sixth sense about that, and
Look
they'll
at Marty
do it.
Lando in Ed Wood.
Yeah.
And playing Bela Lugosi. He was phenomenal.
He was wonderful.
Is artistic collaboration now so complicated that a single vision, an auteur, as it were, can no longer really exist in filmmaking?
Collaboration is essential to. I mean, I used to always say collaboration was the sex of creativity.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and it has nothing. A single vision doesn't exclude collaboration by any means, because that vision is constantly modified by what the actor will bring to it.
Absolutely.
Do you agree?
Absolutely, because I mean, you think about it, and you know, in order to make a picture, you have this equipment, you have everybody around you. You need a lot of people to do it. There are other ways. Other people make films with a single camera and a lower budget, that sort of thing. But you're still dependent if you're dealing with a narrative. To a certain extent, you're still dependent on a number of people working together to carry out something you believe in and that they can contribute to. You have to all be open to contributions, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think about it too. Over the years, I go see painters exhibitions in museums. And I saw one a couple of years ago here, last year, Titian, I think. And the person was taking us around and said, well, the columns were done by so-and-so and the birds were painted by someone else, and explained that they all worked together under his direction. You see, I think it was Titian or Tintoretto, and it was a Venetian, I know. And it was a matter of a whole bunch of people having a school of artists under him, students, working and doing certain things, and having the whole vision. So it's very similar.
Yeah,
But you've had that with
more than
Dean and
often
Walter Murch and all the people that you've worked with for years. You've had a team.
Yeah, what I want to say is more than the vision is kind of the direction you want to go into, and the so-called dictatorial part usually is like trying to strike out those the kind of cop-out solutions where people want to do the rote thing or the safe thing, and it's more saying, no, we're trying to accomplish that. Don't give me, you know, kind of that type of a cliche. So you don't mind it when they come up with some real idea that's truthful and innovative, but you sort of hate it when they want to do the
But the key thing here is that you all have to be, when you're about to go on into the rehearsal, and you could usually tell in rehearsal, hopefully before so, but the idea is that everybody should be making the same movie. Because if you find that you're with an actor and you're into first week of shooting and you're stuck in the trailer, to just convincing the person to come out there to do a scene a certain way, you're in trouble then.
And usually it's fear that they... My career, as I look back of all the things I was really in trouble for, like from back as a writer to directing or casting, what stuff was controversial. In the case of Patton, I also ultimately got fired for that opening of the beginning. Usually the stuff that you were in the most trouble with is the stuff that later on everyone talks about as being the good stuff, and it makes sense because it was a little away from the rote. You're always trying to fight off this kind of standardization of, you know, it's got to be this way. The special effects guy wants the effects to be that way. That's why all the movies look the same, because those other subcrafts tend to, the guy falls off the horse the same way because he fell off the horse in 10 other movies. And you're always trying to fight, say, no, this movie is at least an individual thing. Let's try to find a way the guy ought to fall off the horse in this movie. And that's where you get the resistance. That's where you need to be the person saying, no, let's come back to what we were doing.
You know, there's something that's talked a lot about independence right now as films that are really smaller films, or intimate films, or writer-driven films, as opposed to the kind of effects-driven films of studios. And Francis, you've been quoted as saying that actually the two favorite films of yours in your heart are The Conversation and Rumblefish, as opposed to the films that people would talk about immediately as the film that they identify with you. Was that because of that?
Well, certainly, being a person who wanted to write original screenplays, The Conversation is one of the few that I got to do. So I'd love to go on now, especially in hoping at this age of my life that I could maybe only do now things that I write. You know, and writing has that 8-month lag problem that you got to sit and write, and nobody else has a job while you're writing.
Exactly.
So you're under pressure to say, can't you direct the movie, you know? So now I'm hoping to do that. Rumblefish was just a kind of peculiar thing that I saw that way and was grateful, although it made zero money. And also, so I hope to go back more to the things that I would like to write about, and having the discipline to do that, to not work. And because obviously if you're making other films in between. It's very hard to write the screenplay the 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm in right now.
Yeah.
Working on the screenplay is taking 6 months already. It's going to take another few months.
And no one gets paid during
Nobody
that
gets paid during
period.
that time. And also, at the age of 55, becoming 56, how many more pictures can you do?
Wow.
You know, so that I'm averaging a picture every 2 years, kind of every 2 years. You know, it'd be nice if I could do one a year, but it used to be one a year, you know. But I'm the type of project I'm interested in now.
So write them, then you have to sell them, and you have
Yeah.
to fall out
I
at
gotta
one
go-
studio
exactly.
and go to another.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Age of Innocence went through 3 studios before it got made. You know,
You've also both produced. I mean, both as producers on your own work, but also executive producing work. And recently, Marty, you produced the work of several independents with Matthew Harrison, with Allison Anders, and I know, Francis, you know, you've announced even just a slate of films that's now Zoetrope is going to be doing. Is this also part of what you're trying to do on top of writing and directing as a whole nother aspect of your careers?
I tried it as an altruistic a thing, and I must say it's been about 8 years of it now, and I don't think I should continue because it's I don't have the time, I don't think, to really properly guide the people. I was figuring younger people, giving them chances, that sort of thing. Certain executive producing situation I'm doing as favors, for example. You don't do it as a favor. What I mean by that is that you're helping certain friends, quite honestly. And of course, the subject matter has to be there, the director has to be there,
right,
and that sort of thing. But I found that, I don't know, it's maybe a dissipation of my energy, which I need more and more, excuse me, I need more and more for my own pictures, and try to help out some friends. That's what it's come down to now. And you see, I've never really had a head for figures, a head for money. I don't really even understand sometimes the complexities of how a film gets made in terms of studios and that sort of thing. So I've always been feeling lucky I got the money to make pretty much the pictures I wanted to make, and sort of run with it and try not to go too much over budget and that sort of business. So when I started to branch out as producing, I found that it was, I don't know if that's creatively I feel any creativity about it. It wasn't satisfying creatively, and in the sense you're trying to help another person with their vision. I can maybe do it another way, but as producer, I don't know if it's even going to continue to exist this way. It just doesn't. It just takes too much time.
And Francis, you have a new slate of work.
Well, you know, I did it more out of enthusiasm and in the fact that back then in the early or the middle 60s, I really thought that we had the potential to have a company that
Exactly.
could change the system. And, you know, I started very early because George Lucas got to make his first films at Carroll Ballard, and I really did have in mind that we could one day be a real film company, and we'd have a policy of, you know, for every dollar we earned, you know, 25% would be dedicated to movies that don't necessarily have a chance to make money, but that would widen the field, and that holy grail of a company that was balanced in that way, which to this day exists. And as I think back on my life to the point I am, the only thing I regret, I don't regret any of the projects I did or pickles I got myself into, but I regret a little bit that the film industry that we're leaving to the next generation is not quite as good and as it was what we received.
What lies ahead for you, each of you, at this point in your careers? Is it a big project? Are there big endeavors? Is Zoetrope something you're starting up again? Are you working in different directions?
I confess that I have once again been rekindled with what I think are exciting ideas about a way to go. And I know for myself, I want to exclusively do my own writing. I feel I've done the last of my studio pictures that, you know, as you know, I'm involved in a very big wine and other kinds of businesses that it's like the old days when I was a drama major. I had to become an English major because the faculty was going to flunk me if I didn't. And I feel, in other words, I don't want to have my income and my family to be dependent on the movie business because then they hold you hostage. So I think I have achieved that, and I'm looking forward to really a lot of personal writing for films. I have a big project that I'd love to do. Finally, I've been thinking about for a long time, and I'd love to do that. And I don't feel I've made the film that I really have in my heart. And
what is that? Can you are you at liberty to say?
It's
Not really.
original screenplay. It's sort of as though it's as original in terms of like the way the conversation was just a story, except it's kind of as big as Apocalypse Now in terms of its scale. And I've been trying to earn in all the things we do, either to impress the studios or more important, the distributors and the completion bonds, that I can make movies extremely efficiently. My films don't go over budget and stuff. All of that is, as I was saying before, all trying to get the ingredients so you could one day make that kind of a dream project, what we always used to call the dream project, the personal film that you do. And I also feel that there's a fabulous time in this period of confusion in the professional film industry relative to the studios and stuff, that it is possible for a company like a United Artists
to emerge again.
Every once in a while I call up Marty and I say United Artists, and he says, all right,
I'm
fans,
there.
I'm
there.
Dean Martin, is it other projects?
Dean Martin was more of an assignment, but the assignment, I must admit, was alluring. You know, it's a period that I grew up during, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm fascinated by American celebrity, the Italian-American issues, aspects of it. I mean, pretty much I felt, as I've said before, I think I've gotten to make pretty much the pictures I've always wanted to make. I don't think I've ever... The biggest problem for me was that Last Temptation of Christ, and that finally got made. I have about 3 or 4 projects lined up over the next few years that I've either collaborated on the script or whatever. I'm sometimes something falls in my lap. I don't know. You know, I'm always tempted, but I don't really see that. Oh, I'm going to work to a point and make this one particular film that I've always wanted to make. I have a few in mind, and I kind of, as I said, I've had 3 or 4 pictures that I like to make. They still need to be tinkered with in a way, and ultimately I keep looking towards, if you can keep going, and if you live and everything, you keep going to the late age. I keep thinking of John Huston working on Wise Blood, Kurosawa, and Luis Buñuel, people like that doing films into their 70s and 80s, but again, very cheaply, you know. The other passionate side of the issue is, for me, I'm getting more and more involved, more than producing, I'm getting more involved with the preservation and restoration of old films and that sort of thing. And a lot of my energy is going there, you see.
Neither of you, again, are simply filmmakers. Both of you do a range of different work in other fields. And Francis, you've noted as a winemaker, you have a restaurant, you have a resort. Believe me, I understand the difficulties of trying to put together a resort with different things with Sundance. Marty, you've done an enormous amount of work with film preservation and film culture. So you're really doing things much beyond the work that you just do in film. Has this become a major part of your life? And for both of you?
Well, I have a general restless creativity. I mean, I like to build things. I like to see things go from idea to result, which is why I like to cook, because that's you know, in an hour and a half you can have this thing and then you serve it and everyone says that's good. A movie you wait 2 years and they go, well, we don't know if we like it. But very clearly I'm trying to balance my life so that I can focus on what I most want to do, which is to write and make a film and not have to depend on that also to support my family. So I've used this desire to build and what have you to try to set up a little bit of, what do they call, diversification. You know, so I'm not dependent on
and Marty, that with film preservation,
well, the film preservation came out of a desire of a love of these old movies that came out of the Hollywood system that I really adore, and not only to preserve them but also to restore them, preserve them, and have them shown properly. But that also means foreign cinema too. And I did a film documentary on a kind of a journey through American cinema, which meant that it was my personal view of American cinema, because for me the first film that was ever made was Duel in the Sun. That's the first one I saw by title. So then I went backwards from there, and then went this way, and then I didn't, in the documentary, which turned out to be 3 hours and 46 minutes or so, I didn't really talk about the films that were the average, the type of picture that wins the Academy Award and that sort of thing. It was more like B films, or films made off on a tangent in a way, and different types of directors and writers and actors and that sort of thing. And I'm beginning another one now on Italian cinema, which we hope Cecchi Gori will finance.
What does it start with?
It starts with Paisan, because that was the first one I saw on television in New York, 1948. I was 6 years old. Paisan, and then Open City, then Shoeshine, and going up from there all the way up to Antonioni, and up to the 1970, I'd say. And so the idea of these things is to get the word out, because when we were younger, the word was gotten out by people like, I don't know, Richard Schickel doing The Man Who Made the Movie, The Men Who Made the Movies. Prior to him, the French and the Italian, the French and the British critics. See what was happening in the late 50s. I was becoming aware of film that I might be interested in making movies, but how can you make them from the neighborhood I came from? It's like, you might as well say you're going to be an astronaut. Who knew? So we start to look at all these films. I had an obsession with all kinds of films, including foreign films, because I like to read the subtitles in these French pictures and Italian films and that sort of thing. But by the late 50s, the word got around that the only serious filmmaking is foreign. Only Ingmar Bergman, only, Fellini, only this. So for about 2 or 3 years, we rejected all the American films. But I had grown up on American films. And then by 1962 or 63, Andrew Sarris brought in some of the auteur theory, quote unquote, which has been much maligned, but had some very interesting things about it, into America. And I read the articles and I realized, wait a minute. I don't have to be ashamed of liking American films or saying that only foreigners make more serious work. And so therefore, American cinema opened up again, validated for me my original reactions to it, but also opened up like a treasure trove of these things, because now silent films are being restored. I'm telling you, you look at a silent film restored, it's a whole other world. You see them properly, it's a whole other world. And so in a funny way, what I'm trying to do is do a similar thing that those critics or those writers did at that time, for us to at least, you never know, a film gets shown, a documentary, and some kid in the Midwest sees The Golden Coach by Renoir. It might become a writer, an actor, director, I don't know, musician, composer. It's throwing it back out there and letting it stir up, because there's a real problem now, as I said before, that the American public has been told that they don't like to read subtitles, you see. So there's more an aversion to that sort of thing. But if you show, I've co-distributed some foreign classics in new restored versions, like Rocco and His Brothers, Golden Coach, and a bunch of others, Purple Noon and Contempt. Seen on a big screen, maybe you might be sparking some creativity out there.
I think it's still important, because one of the things that each of you have been able to do has been able to bring, through the power of your own celebrity and important significance as directors, Americans' attention to certain directors. I mean, even in the presentation of Kurosawa's work that you did, was to bring people's attention to the fact that you're able to bring this film out. Are there filmmakers or individual films that you'd like to still do that with, each of you?
Well, just recently, we did I Am Cuba.
And
I think I mean, you can't discount just the degree of enthusiasm that I know you can't talk to Marty without feeling it, but even my other friends, I mean, they truly do love movies or the cinema, whatever you want to call it, and there's just a natural enthusiasm that you tend to want. I called them and said, you got to see this, and then it's a natural thing that people who love film will want to share it and stimulate it. I don't think it's by any kind of design.
See, you want to make films, you want to show films that when you look at them, makes you want to continue making films. That's what it is, you see.
It's very important.
And it's really important. You look at a picture like, suddenly you're depressed, you're tired, you've been working, and suddenly you see this thing and you say, hey, yeah, I forgot that could be fun. Well, yeah, I want to do that.
When you see a good movie, it makes you want to make a movie. And when you see a bad movie or one of these cynical things that just spins it out, you come out. I mean, ask my wife. You kick everything. I don't want to do this.
What a business.
Nothing is more stimulating than to see, which is why in the 50s and 60s we wanted to.
The last question. The idea is that basically you're at a point now in which you've both been the young filmmakers that came through careers and found this. Are there young filmmakers, are there contemporary filmmakers now that you get extremely impressed when you've seen their work at this point? Are there someone that you'd single out, that you'd say of the new generation? Do you both get a chance to see a lot of
movies that
works?
I see? I went on a period where for 3 years, Fellini was like this. He wouldn't go to the movies.
Yeah, me too. For about 3 or 4 years,
I wouldn't go. I started to go again, but it was depressing. Then I'd see I like To Die For. Gus Van Sant, because it was something, there's a little originality. I mean, it wasn't just showing you the same old thing over and over again. Woody Allen, even when he works in his own little world, he always does something totally original.
His last picture, too, Deconstructing Harry.
Yeah, I mean, some of the character who's out of focus.
Oh, it was wonderful.
He always, there's always some wonderful thing.
The way he was cutting the editing of the dialogue was incredible.
So those are the experiences that really make you want to do it. You just want to, just like when you read a good book, you want to be active in the arts, and when you see cynical or work by route, you don't want to.
It's a bore. You're getting too old to watch it too. You don't have the time. You could be doing other things.
Do you know, it's a question that's been asked many different ways about influences and directions, but I want to end by asking how you've influenced each other. Have you, as growing up in the same period, influenced each other in different ways? Are there works?
I was a
He's
couple of years
He's
old.
older.
It's a big
He's like the older
difference.
brother. It's a different thing.
You know, 3-4 years. I'm
Made a big difference in
58,
terms of
so
cinema.
It's a big difference because he was in the 60s. I never forget seeing you in that loft on Crosby Street, I think it was, or Jones Alley, Jones Street, where you gave a talk because You're a Big Boy Now is opening.
Oh, I don't even remember
Remember,
that.
and you said you have to want to make films. He said so badly that you could kill. That's it. You see, and you talked about the writing experience on Patton and Is Paris Burning, and things like that.
Why do you-
But it was amazing to have somebody come down. It was like 40 or 50 people, kids, younger kids, older people. There was so much activity going on at that time in New York and also Los Angeles about experimental filmmakers and independent filmmakers. It was all bursting out. And he came down and gave this talk. That was the first time. And then we met in Sorrento, Italy in 1970, a few years later.
And I sort of already had a little bit of success as a screenwriter, so I had a couple of bucks, and I was in a position to be helpful, which I tried to do whenever I could. When I had loved
Oh, he took
his
care of
first
a lot of my stuff. Yeah.
his first film.
Street's
I thought was so before Mean Street.
Oh, Who's That Knocking?
I was
you
so
like
impressed with it.
Jeez.
I just loved Who's That Knocking at my door. So I felt, because I actually was working as a screenwriter and getting a salary, that I was able to be of help, to everyone in that group.
Yeah.
And a little bit I was a symbol because I was like the first young guy of our generation who actually was getting jobs,
Yeah.
So
You made three films before Godfather. I mean, really more than three, but it was like Rain People
so
and
it
the
was
other
a
two.
sort of hope. It was
Yeah.
sort of a hope that we could all do it, because before that we all thought, gee, well, we are really going to get to make a feature. I thought I was going to work for the USIA.
Yes, the USIA, that was the big thing.
That
But
was
they
the only
didn't
job.
like my work, what I did for them. They burned one of mine. They didn't care for it.
And I was able to introduce people like Marty to, people who then could be
George
helpful to-
Lucas and everybody, and also
or Ellen Burstyn, I
yes,
know.
he got me to do Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore,
which was an important picture.
because Mean Streets was such a kind of an obviously off the beaten track type film that John Calley mentioned that I should be doing this kind of film after you had given the script to Ellen Burstyn, actually, and I realized, let me try to do a film, or really a studio picture, and try to give it something
I tried
special.
to get Marty the job to do the second Godfather.
Yeah, I know.
Because I never want to have anything
I know.
to do with gangsters again. I thought he would do great,
It would have been great.
and he did.
Well, it's been wonderful to have you both here. I really thank you both very much for appearing with us, and thank you for appearing on USSB.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.